Hi, everyone. Welcome to the July NCAPPS webinar, Tools and Approaches for COVID-19 and Beyond. Next slide, please, Connor. So my name is Bevan Croft. I co-direct the National Center on Advancing Person-Centered Practices and Systems with my colleague, Alex Bernardi. We're glad for you to be joining us in this free, open to the public NCAPPS webinar. Let's go to the next slide, please. So NCAPPS is an initiative that's funded by the Administration for Community Living and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And our goal is to promote systems change that makes person-centered principles not just an aspiration, but a reality in the lives of people who use long-term services and supports across the lifespan. These webinars are part of our center's activities, which also include technical assistance and learning collaboratives and a number of other things. Next slide, I believe we have a few logistics for you. This webinar has a chat feature enabled, and we welcome and encourage you to use chat to engage with the panelists and with each other. If you would like to engage with all attendees in the webinar or have all attendees see a question or a comment, do be sure to select all panelists and attendees just above the chat window so that everyone can see it. Otherwise, your message will just go to the folks who are panelists and hosts. This webinar is being live captioned in both English and Spanish. The English captioning is available to you within Zoom if you click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And the Spanish captions are available in a separate window using a link that you'll see on the screen and is also entered into chat. You can go ahead and click on that link. We have built in just a handful of polls, which include evaluation questions at the end of the webinar. And actually, Connor, let's bring up the first poll now and see who is here. So you should have a poll question popped up. Please select whichever roles you self-identify as in the poll, so that we can get a sense of who's on today. And the choices are person with disability, family member, self-advocate, advocate, peer specialist, peer mentor, social worker, counselor, care manager, researcher, analyst, community or faith-based provider, government employee, hospital employee, or an HMO managed care employee. So we'll give folks about 5 more seconds to finish up that poll. Okay, and Connor, if you could display the results, please. All right, we got a good number of folks on today, which is fantastic. And I see that the largest group that we have represented here are social workers, counselors, or care managers. Great. And a good number of family members, government employees, other provider employees, self-advocates as well. So thank you for giving us all a better sense of who's part of this community. All right, so a few remarks before we begin. Want to just put on the table that since March of this year, our worlds have all been turned upside down by the coronavirus, from changes in routines and schedules because of social distancing to the loss of loved ones. This spring and summer have been some of the most disruptive and unsettling months of our lives, and there's no clear end in sight. At the same time, it's important that we acknowledge that health and wellness are socially determined, and therefore social justice and well-being are inseparable. This spring, we witnessed the murders of Black Americans, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others. And we're now in the midst of a national reckoning with our country's long history of racism and racist policies. Earlier this week, the Centers for Disease Control revealed data, new data, that in America, Black and Latinx people are more than 3 times as likely to be infected and almost twice as likely to die of coronavirus compared to white people. So this fact is a powerful reminder that the coronavirus and the movement for racial justice are all part of the same historical moment. At NCAPPS, we've been thinking deeply about how we can promote well-being and social justice within long-term service and support systems. We are really hoping to work at the intersection of disability and race, and to better understand the roles that culture, trauma, and all of the isms play in person-centered thinking, planning, and practices. In the coming months, we are looking at rolling out events and resources to further these goals, and we are also continuing to listen and to learn from our community about how we can do more as NCAPPS to contribute to a more equitable and just society. Today, we are carving out one piece of that conversation, and we're going to talk through how we can use person-centered planning tools and approaches to understand, cope with, muddle through this moment in history. We've got a wonderful panel of experts, and they'll be responding to a series of questions moderated by my colleague, Alex. We hope you come away from this conversation with new resources, strategies to try out, and some insights about how we can emerge from all of this stronger and more connected than ever. Before I introduce the speakers, I want to share a couple of NCAPPS resources that might be useful to you after the webinar, and the links will appear in chat. But on our website, ncapps.acl.gov, there are two newish pages. The first is our COVID-19 resources page, where we really tried to curate tools and resources that are specific to COVID-19. On that page, you will find a healthcare person-centered profile, which is a single page, front and back form that you can fill out that contain the most essential information that you would want a healthcare professional to know in the event that you were hospitalized for COVID or for a healthcare emergency. In addition to the fillable form and guidance, we also have worked with experts, including experts on the panel today, to create a number of examples of filled out healthcare profiles of people kind of with a range of backgrounds, so you can get a sense of all the different ways that this tool might be useful. So definitely encourage you to take a look at that, consider incorporating it into your work or into your life or your planning. And then also on that page, we have a number of other videos, tools, resources for all different scenarios that people may find themselves in, whether that's social distancing or planning in the event of someone becoming ill, adjusting to life as we know it. So that's the NCAPPS COVID-19 resources page. The other set of resources I wanted to call your attention to is our NCAPPS Shorts page, which is called Wisdom During the Pandemic. This is a series of videos. We're adding more every week or so, where we've engaged subject matter experts throughout our network to reflect on how we can learn from lessons from person-centered thinking, planning, and practice to sort of cope with the pandemic, how we can ensure that we remain committed to person-centered principles at this time, and even how we can sort of use this time to strengthen those principles. So those two resources are there, and hopefully you will avail yourselves of them. So let's get started. I will now introduce our presenters. So the next slide, please. Yes, great. So we have today, let's see, Amye Trefethen, who works with as the Family and Youth Services Coordinator for NAMI, Missouri. Amye lives with bipolar disorder and has several family members who live with mental health challenges as well as autism spectrum disorder. Chacku Mathai is director for the SAMHSA Healthy Transitions Grant, which is focused on supporting youth and young adults experiencing early psychosis through OnTrackNY and the Center for Practice Innovations at Columbia University. Michael Smull is senior partner at Support Development Associates and the founder and chair of the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices. He's the co-developer of Person-Centered Thinking and Essential Lifestyle Planning. Jenny Turner is a member of the Life Course Nexus team at the University of Missouri Kansas City Institute for Human Development, and she's the big sister of a sibling with IDD. And Janis Tondora is Associate Professor in the Yale School of Medicine's Program for Recovery and Community Health, and is an expert in person-centered recovery planning. So we are incredibly happy to have this panel of experts assembled for you, and I will turn things over to Alex.
Thank you, Bevan, and hi everyone. This is Alex Bernardi. As we move into this next section of our webinar today, we're taking a moment to think about the frames that people bring. I'm going to read this quote just to get started, and this is something that we'll talk about for a few minutes with our panelists. So frames are both windows on the world and lenses that bring the world into focus. Frames filter out some things while allowing other things to pass through easily. Frames help us order experience and decide what action to take. Now, this is taken from Bullman and Deal's book, Reframing Organizations. And extending from this quote and taking forward some of the ideas from Bullman and Deal a little further, we recognize that positive change happens through leadership that considers and draws from multiple lenses or frames. And given that, we're asking all of our panelists today to recognize that each of us brings experience, expertise, and a particular point of view or frame to this moment. And so we'll be asking our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and share how you frame this moment in history. Just a word about how we're going to be going through the next section and in the panel discussion. I will be leading through and just calling on our panelists. We have 5 excellent panelists with us, and this will just help us move through. And given that we have lots to say in limited time, I'll probably just be moving things along. So with that, I will say one more thing to those of us who are joining us through this webinar. We will be bringing the slides down, taking the slides away for much of this part of the discussion so that you can see people a little bit more directly. If you're using the Zoom platform, you can toggle between speaker view and the gallery view by going to the top part of your screen and up towards the top right of your screen. There should be an opportunity to choose speaker view or gallery view. And with that, I will ask our first panelist to answer this question. Could you briefly introduce yourself and share how you frame this moment in history? And I'm going to start with Michael Smull.
Thank you, Alex. As you heard, I'm Michael Smull, and I've been working with people with a variety of disability labels for the past 48 years. And the frame that we're using got started well over 20 years ago as we were asked to help people leave institutions. And we were asked to help people leave institutions to go to real lives in the community. And in order to do that, we needed to learn how they wanted to live the day after they moved, actually the day they moved, not try to discover how they might want to live 6 months later, but have them actually move into their best view of a desired life. To do that, we needed to learn what mattered to them in everyday life, what mattered to them in routines and rituals and relationships. And we also needed to figure out how to balance that because all of us make trade-offs. And all of us are also seeking a balance between what matters to us and issues of health and safety. And the people we were helping move were people who had not had an opportunity to do that kind of reflection, to do that kind of thinking. And so guidance was provided, learning occurred, and that learning was then recorded. And we started thinking about that from the standpoint of looking at what's important to and what's important for. What's important to what helps you be satisfied, content, comforted, fulfilled, happy. Important for health and safety, and be able to describe that balance. But it's a focus on the immediate frame. Now, how would you like to live tomorrow? How would you like to live the day after? And it informs a dream, but it doesn't describe the dream. It also gives you a way to reflect, because what's happened with COVID is your choices, the boundaries on your choices have suddenly changed. They've shrank. And so what does the new balance look like? And when you think of all of the things that are stirring with the quest for social justice, it also gives you an opportunity to say, what is really important to you? What matters to you, and how is that going to change your behavior? So that's the frame that we use.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Next, I'd like to ask Chacku to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Alex, and everyone. It's an honor to be here and take a turn with all of you about this conversation. So for me, first of all, in the introduction, while I have a title, I come very specifically with my personal experience. I'm an Indian immigrant, became a citizen in the United States in the 70s, started here in the United States, experiencing very quickly the xenophobia of a community that did not want us there as people of color, that resented us for being in their neighborhoods, for taking their jobs, for being in their churches, for being on their sidewalks. And experiencing the sidewalk that would reject me, I've been called ever since to transform that sidewalk. Not to necessarily change me. There was nothing wrong with me. Issues that I experienced, whether it was the bullying, the assaults, the hostilities towards my family and myself over the decades since that time, even before I was 15 years old, I had already attempted suicide. I was hearing voices. I was struggling with psychosis and diagnosed with psychotic disorders and substance use disorders, drug overdoses, hospitalization. All the examples of the system that was traditionally, at best, neutral to my circumstances. In the frame that I wanted, in the frame that my family wanted to experience from one person, was one of personhood that restored our sense of personhood, that every dehumanizing experience that we had experienced up to that point would somehow, through the words and the collection of experiences with a person and with a group of people, maybe that were going to be my providers in a treatment program, that they would actually work towards our liberation with us. Instead, we found, at best, neutrality and a willingness to see me as the one that needed to change, me as the one that was deficient, me and my family as the ones that were neglectful or in denial or ignorant, or and to need to assimilate. That was the wrong frame. So I come to you today with a frame that says we need at this time, and we've always needed, to be anti-racism, not racism. The duality is not a duality of I am either a racist or I'm not a racist. It's either I am a racist or I'm an anti-racist. And understanding racism as a collection of policies that are very powerful and justified by racist ideas is the thing we need to grapple with, because there are racist ideas that justify the tools that we choose. So I'm really excited by, even Bevan's introduction today that says we're going to be looking at every aspect of that. And it means a lot to me and my family. So thank you.
Thank you, Chacku. Next, I would like Janis, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Janis. I'm joining you from a quiet corner in my house here in Connecticut. And the frame that I bring to the webinar today really reflects a range of both professional and personal experiences. And as the quote that Alex shared at the beginning reflected on, sometimes those frames can be limiting and sometimes they can be enlightening. So professionally, I'm actually a clinical psychologist, and I've been at that Yale Perch program for almost 20 years now, but I started off my career in a broader disability advocacy role after a family member sustained a severe head injury. And while I value my professional training as a psychologist, I've also become increasingly aware over time of how aspects of that professional frame, they really focus far too heavily on diagnosis and putting people into boxes without really truly appreciating their own subjective understanding of their situation and how they want to handle it. And then another frame that I bring really comes from a more personal experience where I developed a different and probably, honestly, a deeper type of expertise when I was diagnosed about 5 years ago with a brain tumor. And that actually led to a pretty dizzying journey trying to kind of navigate the healthcare system. It involved multiple specialists and surgeries to address the problems I was having. But throughout that time, I had my voice and my choice really robbed from me more times than I would like to admit. So as you might imagine, that personal experience had a pretty profound impact on how I view what it means to be person or patient-centered and how professionals really truly partner with people. So the frame I bring today is one that really represents a collision of my professional and personal worlds. And at the current point in time, with all that we're bearing witness to in terms of the experience of the pandemic and the perpetuation of racial inequities, I see person-centered thinking in practice really as perhaps more important now than ever before to help people build good lives in the community. So I'm really excited this conversation is happening and looking forward to being a part of it.
Thank you, Janice. Amy, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy. And when I think about my frame, so mine is one of, I do have professional experience, but more in the peer kind of universe. So I think I'm bringing the frame of a person who lives with mental health challenges and then also parenting a child that has mental health challenges and also autism spectrum disorder. And for me, the person-centered planning tools at this time have been a life preserver. I have experience in trauma in my own personal life, and it's really easy for me to have kind of suicidal thinking and thoughts. And I have those anyway, even when things are going good. So when things are not going good and there's something, terrifying like COVID-19, and then just, kind of more eye-opening experiences to the things in our world that have always been there, and seeing how bad they are, it's really easy for me to feel completely hopeless. So for me, these tools are what takes this moment from crisis to what I like to call crisis-tunity, which I think I got that from The Simpsons. I think that even though we're seeing some awful things in our country, this is a chance to change. I am appalled that it took crisis to get there, but I feel hopeful. And for me, the thing that switches my brain from hopelessness to hope is usually some kind of a tool, because those tools bring me back to what I know when my brain tells me something else.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. Jenny, we'd love to hear from you too.
Thanks, Alex. And I have the incredible challenge of following such a powerful group of statements. I would echo what many of my friends and colleagues on this panel have shared, that I think our frame starts with our own personal experience. And then it's built and shaped over time with the different experiences that we have that continue that initial trajectory. So as Bevan shared, I'm a big sister of a person with intellectual disabilities, and I didn't know that there was a word for something like person-centered as I was growing up, because as families, you are person-centered. You're automatically, thinking about who your sister or brother or aunt or uncle or whoever that person is as a person, and you know them deeply. I think because of that experience and because of really my parents and my mother specifically, who was always looking forward, always trying to be positive. One of my favorite quotes is from Socrates, and he says, "The secret to change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new." And that was really the frame of my childhood, and it's the frame now of my professional career, I feel like. And working for the Life Course Nexus and getting to be a part of that community of learning that's looking at how do we now provide some structure for exploring what that possibility and problem solving and decision making can look like, so that we recognize and acknowledge the experiences of our past that have shaped our expectations, but also push and move towards change. Like Amy said, especially in this time of crisis, looking for those opportunities and really having a frame or a framework, as it were, to think about how do we move forward? How do we build what we envision as our best life, best system that really recognizes people as people?
Perfect. Thank you, Jane. I'm so appreciative to all of you for what you're bringing to our experience here together. Now, a couple of you have already kind of previewed one of the first question, which I'd like to move into right away. And as you've been describing your frame, you've also been describing a little bit, I've been hearing a little bit about how you define this time as well. So I'd like to ask, why is person-centered planning important at this time? And to start off this section of the discussion, I'm going to ask Amy to get started. We're asking for no more than about 2 minutes per presenter, just to make sure people have a chance to chime in. But we will definitely, make sure that we want to create space for people to say their piece. So Amy, I'd love to hear from you, sort of an extension of why you think person-centered planning is important at this time.
So for me, it's really a life preserver. It reminds me of what I know that I forget when my brain tells me a different story. And the other thing is that it allows me to model behavior that I'm trying to teach to my daughter, because I want her to have skills for coping. So if I use a coping skill, she can use a coping skill. And then throughout my life, I believe doing these kinds of wellness tools, using these different frameworks, for me, they have rewired my brain. And I don't know that that's a scientific fact, but I have more pause. I used to just feel this ick. I can't even tell you what emotion I would feel. I would just feel this big ick that was like tar that I could not move past. These skills have helped me to learn how to navigate that. I can name my emotions. I can come up with an option of what I can do. And for me, it's been very empowering. I feel like I have what it takes and that I'm up to the task. So that for me, so I guess life preserver, and then also modeling, because as a parent, you can tell your kids whatever, but modeling is so huge. And that's a big thing for me because I'm a single parent. And I really want to show my daughter that no matter what your disability, no matter what you have to live with, you have what it takes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jenny, would you like to add?
I think I'll really piggyback on what Amy shared, and it, as we put it in a historical perspective and think about where person-centered thinking and person-centered planning came from, like Michael, shared at the top of the call, it really is about respecting the view and the voice of the person and not underestimating their ability to do anything really, but especially to make decisions and think for themselves and to have those choices. And so like you said, Amy, it's about learning how to articulate how you're feeling and learning how to articulate what you want and gaining some of those skills. And so again, putting that in the context of history, we don't want to return to underestimating or undervaluing the individual and what they are capable of doing. And we don't want to build systems that respond to a perspective that underestimates the person. I think oftentimes in crisis, it's easy to kind of grab hold tightly and maybe unintentionally create power and control relationships and power and control structures. And I think in order to avoid that, we have to be very, very cognizant of respecting the viewpoint and the voice of the person and their loved ones.
The bolstering the viewpoint of the person and their loved ones, certainly. Thank you, Jenny. Janis, would you like to reflect on the importance of person-centered planning at this time?
Yeah, I actually think I'm going to do a double piggyback because some things struck me both what Amy and Jenny said. And the first is this idea of the life preserver analogy, which I really like because, you know, life preservers shouldn't be only those things we get from professional helping or service systems, right? They're about kind of tapping our internal strengths and resources. And at least from my experience in behavioral health, we haven't always done a good job of that. And we've kind of surrounded people with this like sea of professionals that they become dependent on. And what's happened during this time of COVID is that when the bricks and mortar buildings are closed and we have less access to those professionals, we have to get creative and we have to go back to what we know works, and we have to figure out what our own life preservers are. And we have to develop those internal tools and strategies. And there's a wide range of person-centered tools that have historically, at least in my experience, been underutilized, that have become absolutely critical during COVID. And they're also about what Jenny was talking about, which is not assuming that people have to be fully dependent on treatment systems, right? Like our whole goal should be helping people draw on their own resources, the resources in their circle, so they can live their life in the community. So at the next question, I'm going to preview a couple of those tools, but really just want to say, the fact that they're being used more consistently now out of necessity, I hope is really a preview of things to come, that they will be used well into the future,
Beautiful, thank you, Janis. And yeah, we're going to get there to the tools. Michael, I think you want to reflect on the importance of person-centered planning in this time.
And it is a real pleasure to be presenting with people where it is just a series of affirmations and ways to build on what others have said, because this is an opportunity for learning. We are learning more about what works and doesn't work and how people want to be supported. We're also seeing that the default for a system is power over. And we are really seeking, how do we have a system that doesn't default the power over, and how do we make sure that when we're introducing people, we're meeting the person. So we teach people that you begin with, what do you like, admire, and appreciate about the person, and you're not allowed to say anything about diagnosis in that process. And this becomes very important when people are experiencing COVID, wind up being hospitalized, and really be reduced to a label, so that people meet who that person is. We also want to recognize that, as Janis was saying, there's significant amounts of creativity that are both required, but also happening. In the world of intellectual and developmental disabilities, we've actually seen more individualized responses to who people are, what matters to them, how to best support them. And we need to collect that information and use it to change the system as we get a new normal. I think finally in this, the issue that anybody with disability has experienced is trauma. I have a slide when I do formal presentations that says assume trauma. Well, we're now in a state in this country where everyone has experienced trauma. There are very few, if any, who've not experienced. Well, that should give us an appreciation, but it should also say, as we engage in person-centered planning, let's account for trauma. Let's respond to it and help people build resilience.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And this brings up so many more things that we can get into in a little bit, I think. Chacku, would you like to just reflect on the importance of person-centered planning at this time?
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, I'd like to say that I actually struggled with the language of person-centered planning, the development of it as a construct that was about an individual coming as an Indian, a cultural community. There was a plant ancestral knowledge and trauma. Speaking to what Michael was just speaking to, spoke to a collective need that was much bigger than identifying just what I needed. And it was tough to convey that or to have that conveyed to me. The experience of person-centered planning did seem to move to a few different levels. So for example, when I first saw people utilizing it and experienced it even, it was about being more loving and empathetic and hopeful and interested and curious and even imaginative about what I might want. The question that Michael offered of what matters most was asked. What my strengths were was asked. The rest of the process, however, seemed to be swept by the rest of the system. It seemed to be swept away. The opportunity for the relationship was more about just getting me in the room or getting us into the room. It didn't matter whether we stayed, and we didn't stay. And so the challenge, I feel, is about really when someone asks what matters most to you, and the answer comes, I found myself realizing that conversation about power and my influence over what their ability was to get what mattered to them. You know what I mean? So in other words, if someone said to me, I want to live on my own, in my own apartment, away from my family or away from the people who are all those providers that are all over me, my ability to actually help them make that happen influenced whether they answered the question in the first place. In fact, the one time a man I remember answered the question and said, "You're not going to be able to do that. They're never going to let me out. I don't think you understand the questions you're asking." So I think that caused me to want to influence that grouping of policies that I talked about earlier. I think that made me want to influence and look into what are the inequities that show up in this process and how do I work back from there? Maybe if I worked back from who's not getting this, who's not getting person-centered planning, who's not experiencing the question of what matters most because we can't even get it to them. So then we might be able to unravel some of the issues that we face. So I think this is the time, this is an opportunity for us to be able to do that. I think there's more will and commitment to do that now than there ever has.
Thank you, Chacku. Agreed. This is the time, and thinking about person-centered planning as a piece of a whole other set of structures and systems that are meaningful to people is important. I'm going to move us along to something that we hear a lot of talk about, people wanting to get tangible, to make change, but with a tool. Can we come up with a tool? And there actually have been some brilliant tools and supports that people have developed, that people use, and we want to take some time to hear from all of our panelists about what tools they have found most useful. As Amy mentioned, tools can provide something to hang on to in a way. And so for this part, we will be, a few of our panelists have shared a few examples. So the slides may come up with a few examples, but I'm going to move us then into this section, and starting with Jenny, ask if you could share some of the tools that you find most useful and why those are.
Sure. It's really exciting, I think, listening to the panelists, and my brain is going, and I would echo what has been shared, that this is really an opportunity for us to seize the day, right? To think about how can we be innovative and individualized at the same time? And how can we sort of gather some of the collective experiences to move that system change forward? And so I've got some quick examples of tools that I think facilitate the person-centered planning, decision-making, problem-solving process in a way that helps to explore and discover together. Many of you may be familiar with the Charting the Life course trajectory, and I think that's a quick and easy way to understand what does someone want for their life. And you can go as big or as small as you need to go. This is a very specific example related to COVID, but you can also think about big picture, all of life. On the next slide, I think, though, digging a little bit deeper and really thinking about all of the different quality of life domains is something I find incredibly helpful right now, because we know that quality of life is more than just health and safety. Health and safety are critical, but we're seeing the impact of social and spiritual, relationships, or the lack thereof, as we go through and kind of navigate this time. So having a way to break that down and think through that, I think, is critically important. I would also kind of echo what Janis shared about the creativity that's happening right now. And I think on the next slide, there's a Charting the Life course integrated support star, and really using that star as a tool to think through what are all of the different resources and options, starting with what do I have? What are my personal strengths and assets, and really elevating, again, the abilities and skills of the person, and building that into an integrated array of supports and services. I think it's a really creative way to do problem solving, especially when what maybe we're used to isn't available. And then I would say the last tool that I find, it's one of my favorite tools from the Charting the Life course kind of library, is mapping relationships and mapping roles. And I think it's important that we recognize that all people exist within the context of a family, whether that's a family that they were born into or a family that they've chosen. And especially during this time, as we're doing that creative problem solving, we have to understand the full dynamic of the family. And so exploring how that person is connected to those people in their life, or the resources, and how they provide different types of support, both caring about and caring for, is critically important.
Thank you, Jenny, for sharing these. And for those who can see just a little bit, if you're using a phone or something, we will put the website for where people can access these tools if interested, for exploring a little bit more. Next, I would like Amy to pick up with the same question. And I think you have some other examples around tools that you found most useful.
Yeah, so I had training in wellness recovery action planning when I was a peer support specialist, so I feel more comfortable with that. However, my daughter is more experienced in using the Charting the Life course, because that's one of the ways that I would prep with her for IEPs. So this is an example of her. We didn't have a very good printer, so we ended up drawing on the page, and I wanted her to use this, looking at all those different life domains, because I wanted her to think about what can I use in each of these to make me feel okay, and at this point in time, it was just the beginning of the COVID pandemic. We had just moved from the Kansas City area to Jefferson City, Missouri for a job, and then lockdown happened, and it was terrifying. So she put a happy star in the center, because that's her feel good happy. And these are all the things that she can do out of all of these different pie wedge domains to make herself feel good. So you can go to the next slide. This I probably didn't use correctly, and this is coming from my background in rap. I think it's an important conversation for an individual to know, this is what I feel like when I'm doing well, and this is what I feel like when I'm not doing well. So normally I would use this, what's your feel good, happy life? What is that? What don't you want? But I thought it was important for her and I to have a conversation about, what are you like when you're well? What are you like when you're not well? And for us to have that conversation with each other, so that I know, this is what stressed out looks like for Olivia. This is what stressed out looks like for me. So that's how we use this form. You can see what she listed there, and these are messy. I apologize. So you can go to the next slide. This is actually from RAP, and it's from a user of RAP. It's not an official RAP sanctioned tool. I just happen to love it. So this is called a feelings pyramid. I gave the link to the organizers of this. You can find it on the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And I like it because this connects me with what I'm feeling. And then, so the triangle, you center yourself, you do your emotions, and then you write your coping skills all around the triangle. And that's one of my go-tos. I like it because it makes me feel mindful. So the next two slides are just my version of the Charting the Life course tool. So I put in the middle my mood and anxiety and all the things that I could do to help myself, and things that I could avoid too, like not obsessively going down the rabbit hole with the news all the time with COVID. And then you can do the next slide. And it was just my version of what I'm like when I'm well and what I'm like when I'm not well.
Thank you, Amy. I think we're just waiting for the next slide to come up. We might have had a little freeze there. And thank you so much. I think it's really fantastic to be able to see some of the concrete examples and how they're being put in use. Thank you for sharing all of these. With that, I think we will go to Michael. If you could share some of the tools that you think will be most useful at this time.
Let me begin with a cautionary note, and it builds on what Chacku was saying earlier, and that is writing a brilliant plan that is not used is a disservice. I think it's actually a form of abuse. And one of the challenges is to begin with the, why are you doing this and who's going to use it? Is it going to be used by the people who are developing it, in which case you're not too worried? If it's going to be used by the system, in which case you should have some concerns. But when you look at how the tools work together, we teach that you begin with discovery. You begin with how can you learn about the person. But there's some everyday learning tools which I think are intuitive, which can be very helpful in these circumstances where people's lives have undergone significant change. And one of them is called what's working or not working, what makes sense and doesn't make sense. And it's the way to do it is to say, right now, at this minute, Amy could record what's working and not working from her perspective. But then she could ask her daughter what's working and not working about mom from your perspective. And getting the various perspectives gives you a way to take a look at it and be able to say what's next, or where there's disagreement, begin to have a process of negotiating. If you're looking at things over time, there's 4 questions that are really helpful to ask. Given the overarching question, such as, since the pandemic started, what have we tried? What have we learned from what we've tried? What are we pleased about? And what are we concerned about? And looking at those and then saying, based on the answers, what's next? And you can use this in conjunction with some of the Charting the Life coursework. So if you've defined a goal in your trajectory and you know what you don't want, and then you have said, and here's what we're doing to try to get there, ask those 4 questions and be able to see how you might make a mid-course correction or continue on the course you're on. You also have, and Bevan referenced it initially, that 1-page description that would help somebody if they had COVID and were going to the hospital and had it with the health passport. So that you could look at who the person is, how to best support them, and how they're going to survive this depersonalized trip they're about to go on. Finally, for anybody who's experiencing trauma, we should be asking 3 questions. We should be asking how they define safety, what makes them feel safe. And we should be asking them, where do they need control and what's that look like? And then what relationships help you? What relationships will help you maintain that feeling of safety and the feeling of control and help you avoid those situations, those settings that create trauma? And those would be some of the tools I think would be immediately useful.
Thank you, Michael. And I know I've seen coming through in chat, some people have been asking for the 4 questions, and I'm wondering if well, we'll make sure that we get to those, or that we can maybe get them typed in as into chat.
They can find them on the Learning Community website or the SDA website.
Perfect. Thank you. Chacku, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. You know, this has been great. Those were all wonderful resources. I'm grateful to have been trained in as a RAP facilitator as well, in psychiatric rehabilitation approach, and a variety of what I always called vehicles around the opportunity to be who I am and really be, as Janis and Larry Davidson and others have always kind of talked about, being in the driver's seat. And, you know, I always appreciated that so much, because it was just a shift in the construct that helped me see wherever it was, that now it was an opportunity for me to look at what works for me. And especially in a COVID environment, self-care is primary care. And that's the real way in which the decisions that I'm already making over and over and over again are now getting utilized and leveraged as strength and ways in which I've been doing this and honored and recognized. So that said, I think there are a few adaptations that we've had to make in a few different areas. Peer support is one of the biggest ones, in terms of really making sure that we're not getting stuck on a tool and the mechanisms of the tool, and really honoring the experience of a person. So one, I'll just tell you right away, one big example was, you know, we started a hip-hop, Healing Through Hip-Hop initiative. And that was done because we were trying to tell stories that didn't have words for it, other than the words we created through verse, through music, through fashion, through tagging, through dance. These were cultural stories of emerging from trauma, as Michael said, that couldn't be captured in a workbook, but could be captured on a playlist. It could be captured on a cassette drive. It could be captured on a YouTube video, you know? And so these are the experiences now that we've evolved to in terms of capturing what works for us and what matters to us. If all I got to do to understand what matters to my 12-year-old daughter is to take a look at her playlist or look at her library of who she's listening to on YouTube, you know, and really ask her about it and understand what matters. And that tool, from a cultural perspective, and from, again, I'm going to bring back the anti-racism kind of framework here. If I'm going to really understand that there have been disparities and inequities resulting from policies that create them, right, that make them happen, and belief systems that actually justify them, I'm going to recognize that, well, you know what, maybe the explanatory model that I've been somehow conveying, like a medical one, isn't where somebody's coming from. So the cultural formulation interview, for example, that was finally done and offered a way in which to use the words of the person speaking to you, use the words of the family speaking to you to actually validate their experience. If I'm saying, look, it's a conflict with my son, I don't know what you're talking about with all this other illness stuff. I'm talking about the conflict with my son right now. And, or if I'm saying I'm hearing voices, I'm not saying I'm paranoid. I'm not, you know, really understanding where it's coming from. And then lastly, the model of a tool I think that has been very effective is really recognizing that communities have developed tools of their own. There's a desire to build, not be warmed by other people's fires all the time, and to just recognize the fire that I've built. And so there are racial equity tools. The website Racial Equity Tools has a huge list of COVID-19 resources that people have used. They may not be directly applied for people with disabilities or a particular population or something like that, but they are applicable. Don't forget that they belong in the mix of resources there. And then lastly, I think the question that some of us are like, for example, I'm a member and a facilitator in Hearing Voices Network, which is an international network of those of us who hear voices and other extreme states. And the approach, the tool that we use is relationship. Michael talked about it right from the beginning there. It was a dialogical approach that allows us to make room for the meaning we're making out of our experiences. And that is how I start to let go of the belief systems that have held me back in the first place. That's how I start to let go tools that never worked for me, that almost worked for me, but never really worked, you know, and start to find ones that do. So that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chacku. And I've been seeing some messages coming through about, you know, whether tools are available, and or a list of at least the tools will be available. Just so people who are participating know, yes, we will be compiling as what's been referenced and making that available also on the NCAPPS website in a couple weeks. So I would like to also hear then from Janis, if we could hear from you, from your perspective on the tools that are working best.
Sure, great. We have a couple of slides here. They're going to pop up. I'll just touch on them briefly. Actually, Amye and Chacku both already referenced the current slide, which is a modified version of a tool called Wellness Recovery Action Planning that is really a person-centered tool that's been used for years, developed by people with lived experience, for people with lived experience, by Mary Ellen Copeland and others. And that tool has been modified for particular application in the midst of COVID, with an emphasis also around how do we maintain the connections to other people that help sustain our recovery in these challenging times. But before I go on to the next slide, I want to add a cautionary note, just like Michael did, which is that when we start talking about tools, we really have to remember that the tools are only as effective and they're only as good as the skill and the values of the people who are using them, right? And so sometimes people use these person-centered tools all on their own, but oftentimes they may have a natural supporter or a professional helping them kind of apply these tools to their life and the life they want to live. And you know, it's really critical that we remember these are the kinds of tools we want to encourage people to use them and expose them to them, but we never want to mandate them or require people to then share them with a service system or a professional, right? Because that goes against kind of the core values. So again, encourage them, but at the same time, we need to respect that there may be reasons why people want to keep these person-centered tools really just to themselves. So RAP would be the first one. The next one I want to highlight is called the sickbed visioning tool. And I want to highlight this. I think it was something, Chuck, who you were kind of touching on, is because this is a really nice example of just a community-based sort of grassroots get together, figure it out. It doesn't have to be a tool developed by a bunch of professionals that are then offered to the community. It came from the community. And specifically, I want to give a shout out to Famous Chrome and Veronica Baetti Flores. And I hope I got the names okay, because haven't actually met. We had a very lively email exchange. And this was a tool, it was New York specific, developed at a time when the pandemic was peaking in the city. And frankly, people were dying all around them and really struggling to manage the different phases of this. And as you can see, it's got a whole bunch of different tools in there. Incredibly practical when you think ahead to the point that if you actually get sick, if you're hospitalized, who's going to take care of your pets? Who's going to take care of your kids? Who can do your laundry for you? And they're just things that we tend not to think about in advance. And these are great tools that kind of walk you through that. And there's an ongoing accessible Google Doc that you can access, and the tool can actually be adapted for use in any state. The next one is the healthcare person-centered profile. Both Michael and Bevan have talked about this. I'm not going to go into detail other than to say that when we developed these tools, we thought a lot from that frame of how they help people. You know, how do we help sort of honor people's preferences and choice at a time when they're in the midst of a COVID crisis and potentially unable to communicate their preferences. And I think these tools really do that. But the other thing that I think they do, you know, sadly, I think all of us have seen the news reports of healthcare professionals who are desperate, who are sometimes the only person bedside at a patient's side when they're at their most critical point, potentially on a ventilator. And those healthcare professionals sometimes have no information or very little about who the person is, how to connect with them, how to provide them comfort. So these tools actually give those healthcare professionals something practical to kind of foster that connection and compassion. And then finally, the last one I want to point out quickly at this sort of other end of the stage of moving through the COVID pandemic, one of our pioneers in the behavioral health recovery field, Pat Deegan, has released a tool that's about sort of coming out of quarantine. What have you been missing in terms of activities and the people that are important to you? What does it involve, or what does it look like to re-engage with those activities? What are the costs and benefits of that? And then based on your own personal cost benefit analysis, what are you going to choose to re-engage in and how? And Pat's put together a great one-pager, a great 5-minute video. I used this for myself a couple of weeks ago when I was deciding whether or not I went on my kind of girls' weekend with my best friends from childhood. I decided to go because the risk was worth it. But at the same time, I took a precaution and I slept on the porch. And believe it or not, it was something that kind of helped me walk through costs and benefits around it, and at the same time make decisions about how I could re-engage in that activity that was so important to my wellness, but at the same time do it safely and not be confined in kind of close quarters at night. So again, just wanted to highlight those. They're on the website. Really encourage people to check them out.
Thank you, Janis. This is a pretty terrific collection of tools, and for those of you who have been engaging in chat, if there are other tools that you're interested that you think are valuable, we can also collect those and make those available as well when we put them out. This is such a rich conversation, and we have questions coming in, and I want to make sure we have some time for Q&A. So to the panelists, there are a couple questions remaining, and you've got your questions, but what I'm going to actually ask is that we combine our last two questions around your key considerations for person-centered planning as we navigate this pandemic, as we confront structural inequity and racism. So the final question I asked you was planning to ask was, what's one key message that you want the audience to take away? So as we go through this next section, if you can sort of think about what you would like to present as both key considerations and a really key message that you want the audience to come away with, that would be great. And I think we'll then have time for to hear from some of the questions from people who have been participating in the audience. So for this section, I'd like to start with Chacku. If you could start with your answer to some of these questions.
It's no small task, Alex. Thanks. Yeah, I think that for me, that let me just start with the takeaway, or the take home. There's a process that all of these different tools founded in this and housed within this awesome framework of person-centered planning offer an opportunity for a co-construction, a mutual exchange, an ability to be transformed by each other's understanding and point of view. Those are the fundamentals in my mind that can be lifted to a place of social justice, racial justice, and so the racial equity we seek can be founded in the process of actually being aware of and more conscious of the liberation the other is seeking as well. It's not going to be the liberation you are seeking. It's going to be different. And there's going to be a different set of tasks that are required of you in order to be able to make room for the liberation of others. And it's the same, and I got to do the same thing. It's not a powerless and power over scenario. It's, yeah, maybe limited power, no doubt about it. There's an oppressed group that in any one of our communities that we're working with and need to be able to attend to and hear and center. And the ability to decenter ourselves in this conversation enough that we can actually be compelled to move towards them without necessarily losing your center about what's important to you too, is the skill set. It's the art form that we're talking about. And that is a lifelong practice. And if I make that a lifelong practice, I'm going to be seeing myself more like a river than a statue. And I'm not going to have any problem pulling those down. I'm not going to have any problem thinking and rethinking the ones that I erect in their place. When the new person comes along to say, that's not working, that's hurting, that's holding me back, that's not what I see. This is what I see. And so I think the key considerations that I was thinking of in the original question, Alex, I mean, the best way I would come is that there is always going to be a sphere of influence that I can take that is beyond what I might have thought in this process. And I'm always going to face a circumstance with every person and family I work with that calls upon that sphere of influence to go a little bit further. And if I can do that, I am probably going to be able to say in a better way that I am moving towards equity. I am moving towards and being an anti-racist, not moving back to being a racist, because I too will be in that place. I will too recreate the qualities that outraged me in the first place if I'm not reflective in that way. And the only way I can be reflective of that is if I'm with you in the room. That's the key, to be with you in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's great framing and setup for us as well to think about how this really is a journey that we're all on, and a continuous journey for all of us. Jenny, could you reflect on these as well?
Yeah, you know, I'd like to build, I think, on what Chacku shared, and I think it's well said that it's co-creation, right? And Janis and Michael shared cautionary notes earlier that are really resonating with me, and so again, putting all that together, I think it's important that we recognize who person-centered planning is for. It's become a function of our various systems, right? It's something that we do, unfortunately, oftentimes to people instead of with people or for people. And so as we think about that, we have to recognize that person-centered planning is about meeting human needs. It's not about meeting system needs. And if we're really going to do that, then person-centered planning has to be holistic. We have to think about all of the different quality of life domains. It has to consider the experiences and the preferences and the realities of the person that is living that life currently. It has to recognize and build on the skill sets. We've talked a lot about, you know, the person who is kind of the focus of the planning, and what skill sets do they have, but also what do they need, and how are we facilitating the person-centered planning process in such a way that builds their own capacity for future problem solving and advocacy and planning and decision making. You know, so I think if I had to pick one key takeaway from such a robust conversation, I think it would be that person-centered planning is for the person. And if we can center ourselves in that mindset, then I think it changes the way that we approach the conversations. It changes the way that we use the tools. It changes the way that we then use the information that we gather. And that's my vision of really true successful person-centered planning.
Thanks, Jenny, and such an important reminder for all of us who are working with large and complex systems too. Janis, I'd love you to reflect on this too.
So we, our group collectively, we had a very lively conversation, really thought-provoking, getting ready for the webinar, and it prompted me to think a lot more about the interface of person-centeredness in the pandemic and racial inequities. And, you know, at its core, I always feel like person-centered care is about freedom, right? It's about freedom to build a good life in the community of your choice, freedom to be free from discrimination, freedom to control choices that impact your life. And both the pandemic and recent violence against people of color have really made painfully clear that not all people are equally free. And honestly, even in treatment and service systems that strive to be person-centered, we continue to have staggering disparities, right? We've got disparities in access to care, health, community and recovery outcomes, the use of involuntary and restrictive interventions. And in this sense, people of color and other individuals with marginalized identities, including the experience of disability, they often experience, right, an additional layer of trauma. But that trauma happens both inside and outside our systems. So I really believe that truly committing to person-centered care and planning means acknowledging the fact that we are not immune to the types of oppression and discrimination that plague our broader communities. So I just think it's critical to remember that the full impact of this kind of work, it can't ever be realized unless we're explicitly talking and actually doing something about racial injustice and trauma. Because if our goal is really in person-centered care to help all people live a good life in their chosen community, we can't stay silent in the face of these injustices, and we can't perpetuate injustices inside of our own systems of care. So conversations about race and equity, they can't be implied, they have to be explicit, and we really have to actively work on it. So I'm glad these conversations are coming together.
Thank you, Janis. Yeah, such important and wise words have come from all of you, and I'm just so excited too that these conversations are coming together, because I really feel like there is such an sort of an important connection. Amy, you're next up on my list, so I'd love to hear from you.
So the main thing I can say, I've had good experiences and I've had negative experiences as a person receiving treatment. I did not learn to be the captain of my own ship of wellness, so to speak, until I did this on my own. And I made mistakes, and I might have fallen down 11 times, but I got up 12. And that's what matters. And it's my life. They're my decisions. And a lot of that power was taken away from me. Maybe the decisions I wanted to make weren't healthy decisions, but they were the best I could do at that time. And for me, it's been a process, a lifelong process of being able to do what I could do for myself when I was ready to be there. So I think it's important, if you're with an agency and you're using any of these tools, that it really needs to be that person doing this for themselves. And if I use any of these tools with my daughter, I don't tell her, this is what your life needs to look like, and this is what your healthy needs to look like. I'm just showing her the tool. The other thing I liked, and I can't remember who said it, I think it was you, Jenny, that these are personal tools that I shouldn't have to share with you unless I choose to share them with you. This is my personal wellness, and it's little decisions every day that add up to something big. And what I want to do may not be what you think I should be doing, and what my wellness looks like maybe isn't wellness to you, but maybe from where I'm coming from, man, I got up, I brushed my teeth, and I put one foot in front of the other. Best day ever.
So well said, Amy. Thank you. We're getting a lot of requests about whether this will be recorded. Yes, the answer is yes, and that'll be available. Michael, you are the last to be able to sum up, and I leave it to you for your comments on key considerations and a takeaway you'd like this audience to have.
Well, if you think about what we've all said, and if you think about what many of the people on chat have said, we're all advocates. We all seek to be change agents. And the downside of being a change agent is you can forget that you also need to be a change target, that you need to be somebody who is reflecting on your own inherent biases. You need to be somebody who is looking at, are the outcomes that you're achieving the outcomes that you desire? You know, Janis was talking about we need to reflect on our own systems. Well, we can get sucked into having people tell us what awesome change agents we are and forget that we're flawed humans who need to reflect on, are the actions that I'm taking getting the desired outcomes that I'm looking for? Am I actually thinking about the fact that benign paternalism is often another word for oppression? And am I reflecting on the ways in which I need to change my own behavior and my own actions in order to really achieve the goals that I state that I'm looking for?
Thank you, Michael, and you know, such a great sum for all of this. I've said it earlier, and I'll say it again. I have such huge appreciation for all of you coming together for this discussion, and for what you shared from both your personal, particularly your personal and wise professional perspectives. We have had some questions come in, and I know Bevan has been tracking that. And at this time, we're sort of opening it up a little bit so that some of the questions that have come through can then be posed to our panelists. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Bevan.
Okay, awesome. And wow, I have been really enjoying this conversation with our panelists who are just speaking their truth so beautifully, and also the amazing stuff that's happening in chat. Wow, what a community we have. Okay, so we do have a few questions, and if you have other questions, type them into chat and we'll see if we can get to them. We have 15 more minutes. We have a question about time and timing, and I think, you know, we have a lot of providers, a lot of direct support people, a lot of planners, I think, on the call, on the webinar. This questioner is wondering, says that it's difficult to put a lot of these theories and tools into practice during planning meetings when everyone is rushing out the door after 1 or 2 hours of going after the plans. So do the folks on the panel have any tips about how we can really elevate these theories in the realities of, you know, what many of the planning processes are? And I'll leave whoever would like to. Yep, Chacku?
Just take a turn. I mean, first of all, you know, these are principles that if it's not working, something must change. And that is, at the end of the day, the obligation that I have to, and I think that's been the rub, right? Being afraid of maybe losing my job, or being perceived as problematic or disruptive, or, you know, but the reality is, if the housing for, I mean, just to use Bevan and Alex as an example, they are co-directors of a project. That requires a different process than a hierarchical organization might allow. And that is just another way in which you have to kind of say, okay, wait a second, what are we actually doing differently in order to make that happen? And so managing up, and now, to be honest, it's time to exceed your authority. Exceed the authority you've been given and start challenging the questions that have not been asked and answered.
Awesome, thank you.
Teaching people how to write their own plan. I will remember always a couple of the examples where a mom wrote a plan with her son who was in special education, walked into the planning meeting and said, here's his IEP, it's up to you to translate it. Because it was written in everyday English, not professional English. A friend of mine who has a bipolar disorder would take her plan every time the professional staff changed, would come in and say, here's my plan, read it, and then we'll talk. But we're not going to talk until you've read it. It's very powerful if people can learn to write their own description, their own version of a plan, and then use it. And part of what you have to look at is the planning meeting actually structured to result in a plan? Or is it structured to result in compliance? And if it's structured to result in compliance, then the planning actually has to occur somewhere else.
Bethan, can I jump in and give a quick shout out to peer specialists and the role of peer specialists in the use of some of these tools? Because we do understand sort of the razor thin margins around productivity and time management. And at least within my experience and my work, you know, anyone can get alongside someone and help them use these tools, help them think through like what's their vision for a good life. But doing that does take time. And sometimes we don't capitalize on the talents of other people on our teams. And I would argue that peer specialists, people with lived recovery of the disability experience, are often in the best position to get beside a person and to help them use these tools to chart the pathway forward. So it's just something to keep in mind, because it's not only an effective engagement strategy, it's also efficient and it's time efficient because you're spreading the work around.
Nice. And I will just put a plug in for our August NCAPPS webinar, which is on peer specialists across disabilities. So we have peer specialists with experience working with in a number of different sort of arenas and fields to talk through the different ways that peer specialists, peer values can be supportive, and also the kind of the current challenges. So I'm really excited for that discussion. So yeah.
Great.
All right, so anything else to say around this question around sort of managing time in these tools, which as all of our panelists have rightly pointed out is connected to a host of structural issues that we really need to reckon with. Jenny?
One thing I might just add is something I've personally found helpful with my own family and with friends that I've maybe supported through this, is to recognize that planning isn't a meeting. I think our system has sort of made that flow, and it's kind of gotten us into this habit of thinking planning happens in a meeting, but planning happens over, it's always happening, right? And so I think one of the things I found helpful with these tools is it's a way to capture and gather information, right? It's just a note-taking device for some people. So with my sister, for example, we're constantly jotting things down on her trajectory or on her star, or, whatever, even just a piece of paper. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it helps us to capture the conversations we have when she may not even be intentionally telling us what's important for her vision for a good life later, but we were at the lake and she said this, and we needed to capture that information, because as we move into deciding how are we going to structure her supports, we need to keep that in mind, that she made an offhanded statement. So I think it, for me, recognizing the tools not as something to be filled out in a meeting, but as something to capture information over time, has been helpful on an ongoing basis.
Awesome. Okay, any others before I move on to the next question? I think we have time for a couple more. Okay. Here's a question from Tobias. As an advocate involved in community housing that supports people with disabilities, we're incredibly challenged by the logistical barriers during the pandemic. Our community's rituals and routines revolved around being present with each other in a physical space, and folks are really struggling with the trauma around losing basic everyday routines of seeing people in person. So are you all aware of any innovative strategies for connecting people with their advocates who are not family members? Other than Zoom. We all know about Zoom at this point, right?
Well, I'll just say that, some of the strategies that I've seen is, first of all, not settling for who's showing up on Zoom, and really taking a look at who's not showing up on Zoom, and figuring out the organizational strategy for going out to get them. And so teachers have been doing this. There's a lot of examples out there of needing to take some measured risks, of course, around that, but figuring that out as a team, as a community, as an organization, and really evaluating what are we going to do. Are we really going to wait to find out that somebody died? What is the moral responsibility on us at this time? Just like people decided whether or not we were going to protest and organize. Just like we had to decide, it's the same question. Am I going to let a child be, off my rolls just because he, she, they didn't show up?
Thank you. Other strategies for connections, fostering connections?
All of this also points out the technology have and have not divide, because the way that people are connecting, if it's not Zoom, Mary Bishop just mentioned House Party, which a lot of people have been giving good reviews. But it all comes down to, do you have the hardware? Do you have the connection? And one of the issues that we need to confront is having that piece of that tablet, that basic computer or that smartphone is going to have to be seen as fundamental as any piece of support that we give to people.
Yep. I just want to acknowledge that our community has put in just like all kinds of amazing ideas in chat. And now is probably a good time for me to tell you that we will work to compile, we'll cull through all of the insights in chat as best we can and compile all of this into a document that will be posted on our website. And we'll be sure that links and everything are out to you as well. So worry not, we will retain all of this awesomeness. Okay, let's look at my questions list. This question, we only have a little time left, and I'm almost hesitant to ask it, but I want to, because Chacku, I think you'll have an answer, and others may be able to reflect as well. And it's an important question, and it doesn't have an easy answer. If I wanted to rephrase, this person asked if I wanted to rephrase anti-racist as a to-do statement, is embrace diversity a workable option? And I'm going to quickly say, I'm not a panelist, but Ibram Kendi's book, I want to highly recommend to folks because it takes up this exact question of why we use the words anti-racist. But Chacku, you alluded to this in your early comments, so I wonder if you could just give us a quick respond to this question quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say that it's time to end the euphemisms. I've been asked to soften the words. I've been asked to reframe it to make it gentler, to make it easier. The bottom line, I don't even use structural racism, systemic racism. Ibram Kendi talks about that too. The need to really recognize that when we talk about racist policies, it isn't a pejorative term. We're not talking about you're a bad person for being a racist. We're talking about supporting or not supporting policies, so actually I should say even better, supporting or coming up with new policies that actually dismantle or new policies that actually promote equity. It's either we're moving towards equity or away from it. And so that's really the idea. So removing the pejorative experience of the word racism allows me to say, yeah, I've been a racist, and I will do that again tomorrow if I'm not reflective enough about what I'm doing and I'm up to. And I need to experience that. So that's just my short version of it. But I think you're called to pay attention to how that, and I think talking to each other about that is very important.
Thank you, Chacku. We're going to do more with this too. I raise it now again as a teaser, but stay tuned. This is important, and I think we're ready to go there together, and I'm really excited to do that. All right. I think we're going to quit while we're ahead because this discussion has been fabulous. I'm just so grateful for this community. So thank you everybody for tuning in. All of this is retained. Our job, Alex and I, are to facilitate resources and connection. And so we'll do everything in our power to do that. So this webinar will be available to all of you to share, and we're going to keep going with these conversations. So thank you. Connor, if you could put up the evaluation questions. Just before you leave, if you could please take a moment to respond to these 7 questions. We are always here. We are always listening. Please reach out to us. If you'd like to subscribe to our mailing list, you can send a message with subscribe. Also like and follow us on Facebook. We are on Facebook now. And we'll keep the resources coming at you, and we'll keep this discussion going. We'll leave these evaluation questions up as long as people need. But again, thank you. And I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
You're staying on or re-linking?
We will leave, and there's another link for you in your calendar invite.
Okay, see
See you,
you.
everyone.
See you soon.
Bye. Nice job. That was great.
Mhm.